They said, "Stay in the airport lounge, Grandma. We'll come back for you after check-in." Simple words. So ordinary, spoken with the hurried politeness that people use when they believe they're being kind. I didn't think much of them at the time. It was early morning when we reached Heathrow. The air still smelled of dew, and the car windows were fogged from the chill. My son Daniel drove, humming some tune under his breath, while his wife Clara sat beside him, her eyes glued to her phone. I sat in the back seat, my small suitcase on my lap like an obedient pet. I'd packed it the night before. Carefully folded dresses, my medication box, and an old family photograph I never traveled without. The plan was to fly to Spain for a family holiday. Daniel said he'd found a brilliant package deal in Madrid, and that it would be good for me to get some sunshine. I had been nervous about the long flight, but his voice was reassuring, the way it always had been when he was a boy. That alone gave me courage. As the car slowed at the airport entrance, I gazed at the glass facade, at the endless flow of people moving with purpose. The world felt so big again. For a 75-year-old woman who'd spent the last few years between her garden and her armchair, it was like stepping into another lifetime. Inside the terminal, Daniel handled everything. He was always efficient, confident, traits he'd inherited from his father, God rest his soul. Clara trailed behind, pulling her sleek silver suitcase, her heels clicking rhythmically on the tiles. I could feel her impatience, though she smiled when our eyes met. It wasn't a warm smile, but I told myself she was just tired. Traveling with elderly people could be difficult, after all. When Daniel finally turned to me, he gave my arm a little pat. "Mom, why don't you wait in the lounge? We'll check in the bags and come get you in a few minutes. It'll be easier this way." He said it so kindly, with that half-smile that used to melt my heart when he was small. I nodded, trusting him completely. He was my boy, my only child. "Of course, darling," I said. "I'll just have a seat and wait. Don't rush." I watched as they walked away, Daniel's tall figure and Clara's bright red coat blending into the crowd. I remember thinking how lucky I was, at my age, to still be included in their plans. Most of my friends from the community center spent their days waiting for phone calls that never came. I told myself I had no reason to complain. The lounge was comfortable and warm. I chose a seat near the window, where sunlight spilled onto the polished floor. Planes rolled past, their engines roaring softly, like great beasts ready for flight. I sipped from the cup of tea I bought at the cafe, the steam curling like ghosts between my fingers. I remember feeling proud of Daniel, of how far we'd come. Life hadn't been easy after his father's accident, but I had done my best. I worked double shifts at the bakery and skipped meals so he could have what he needed. Seeing him now, successful, confident, with a wife and a future, felt like a reward for all those silent sacrifices. As I sat there, I thought of the beaches in Spain, of laughter echoing through hotel rooms, of the three of us sharing meals under the sun. I could already hear Daniel teasing me about my wide-brimmed hat, or how long I took to apply sunscreen. When the clock struck 11, I looked toward the security gates, expecting to see them return. They didn't. But I wasn't worried then. I was still smiling, still holding on to the warmth of his last words. "We'll come back for you after check-in, Mum." If I had known that those words would linger in my heart for the rest of my life, I might have held his hand a little longer before letting go. At first, waiting didn't bother me. Airports are made for waiting. They hum with it, like a great machine powered by anticipation. People wait for flights, for loved ones, for new beginnings. I was simply another traveler in the crowd, sitting quietly with my suitcase beside me and my hands folded neatly on my lap. The lounge was warm and smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish. A family of 4 sat a few seats away, the children giggling as they fought over a tablet. Across from me, an elderly couple shared a newspaper, their heads bent close together. It was comforting, watching strangers living ordinary moments. 2 hours passed. I didn't look at the clock much, but I noticed the way the light changed, sunlight shifting across the floor tiles, the morning brightness softening into the yellow glow of noon. I took out the half-eaten biscuit from my bag and nibbled on it slowly. Every so often, I glanced toward the security gates, expecting to see Daniel's familiar stride or Clara's red coat. They didn't come. At hour 3, A little uneasiness began to nibble at my thoughts. Perhaps the check-in lines were long. Or maybe there'd been confusion with the baggage weight. Clara had packed enough clothes to fill a small boutique. I smiled at the memory, reassuring myself. But when I looked at the departure board, my heart skipped. The flight Daniel had mentioned, Flight 317 to Madrid, flash boarding, then final call, and finally, departed. I blinked hard, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. I fumbled for the crumpled itinerary Daniel had printed for me that morning. There it was in black and white. Flight 317. My pulse quickened. Surely it was some misunderstanding. Perhaps they'd rebooked the flight. Maybe Daniel was still at the counter, sorting something out. I didn't want to overreact. He always said I worried too much. Another hour passed. The families around me began to thin out, replaced by new ones heading to different destinations. I noticed how the staff changed shifts, how even the announcements began to sound familiar. That's when I met Aisha. She was a cleaner, a young woman with a bright orange vest and a kind, open face. She must have noticed me sitting there for too long, because she approached with a gentle smile. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said softly. "Are you waiting for someone?" I hesitated, embarrassed by how unsure my own answer sounded. "Yes, my son. He said he'd come back after check-in." Her eyes flickered with something, pity perhaps, but she masked it quickly. "Would you like some water? You've been sitting for a while." Before I could reply, she disappeared and returned with a small bottle of water and a sandwich wrapped in plastic. "Please," she said, placing it gently in front of me. "On the house." I tried to refuse, but she insisted. Her kindness made something inside me ache. I wasn't used to strangers noticing me. Not since my husband passed. Hours 5 and 6 blurred together. The lounge grew quieter, emptier. I sipped my tea, the third one of the day, and stared out the window at planes gliding into the orange horizon. Each one taking off felt like a reminder. Time was moving on, but I wasn't. At some point, a young man named Ben, a cafe worker, came over during his break. "You're still here, ma'am?" he asked kindly. His face was so full of concern that I had to look away. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, my family's just sorting something out." But when he walked away, I felt the weight of the lie press against my chest. By the 8th hour, my body was stiff, my throat dry, and my heart strangely quiet. The crowds had thinned, replaced by the echo of rolling suitcases and the distant hum of announcements. I kept looking toward the gates, still half expecting to see Daniel's face appear, tired, apologetic, laughing at the mix-up. But the seats around me stayed empty. The clock ticked on. And that's when it finally sank in. A slow, cold realization that spread through me like frost. They weren't coming back. By the time the evening lights dimmed inside Terminal 3, the once bustling lounge had turned eerily quiet. The chatter, the laughter, the rolling suitcases, all of it had faded, replaced by the distant hum of cleaning machines and the faint echo of airport announcements. I was still sitting in the same seat, my suitcase at my feet, my teacup empty. The clock on the wall read 9:15 p.m. That meant I had been waiting for nearly 8 hours. 8 long hours since Daniel and Clara told me to stay put. A security guard walked past, a tall man with a patient smile. He glanced at me once, then twice, before finally approaching. "Evening, ma'am," he said gently. "You've been here a while, haven't you? Are you waiting for someone?" His voice was kind, but it broke something in me, because it was the first time someone had asked. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. "Yes, my son. He said he'd come back for me after check-in. Maybe I missed him." He frowned slightly and crouched beside me. "Do you have his flight details?" My fingers trembled as I handed him the itinerary. He took it and disappeared for a few minutes, leaving me staring at the clock again, watching the seconds drag by. When he returned, I saw the pity in his eyes before he spoke. "Ma'am," he said softly. "I checked with the airline. Flight 317 to Madrid departed at 2 this afternoon. It says your son and his wife were on board." I stared at him, the words hanging in the air like smoke I couldn't breathe in. "No. Iwisparat. That can't be right. They said they'd come back." He hesitated, clearly unsure what to say. "I'm very sorry, ma'am. Maybe there was confusion." Do you have another contact number for them? I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking. Daniel's number was the first on my call list. Of course it was. I pressed it and held the phone to my ear, praying to hear his familiar voice. It rang once, twice, then straight to voicemail. Hi, this is Daniel. Leave a message after the beep. The sound of his cheerful voice felt like a cruel echo. I tried again. And again. Each time, the same recorded tone. Finally, I sent a message. I'm still waiting in the lounge, love. Are you coming back? No reply. That was when the tears came. Not in sobs but in quiet, steady streams that blurred the world around me. I wiped them quickly, embarrassed, but the security guard placed a tissue in my hand and spoke softly. It's all right, ma'am. Let's get you somewhere more comfortable. He took me to a small assistant's office where Aisha, the cleaner from earlier, was finishing her shift. When she saw me, she rushed over immediately. Oh, Grandma, she said. She'd started calling me that earlier. You're still here? The moment I saw her kind face, I broke. I told her everything, my voice trembling like paper. How Daniel said he'd be back, how I'd watched the hours slip away, how I thought maybe I'd made a mistake. She listened quietly, her eyes glistening. It's not your fault, she said softly, squeezing my hand. Some people forget what love is supposed to mean. Those words hit deeper than she knew. Aisha called an airport welfare line, and they arranged a place for me to rest until morning. They even brought me a blanket, thin, but warm, and a cup of tea. I remember sitting there, sipping slowly, staring at the blinking lights outside the window. Somewhere above those lights, Daniel's plane had flown long ago, and my heart, heavy as it was, refused to believe what my mind already knew. He had left me behind on purpose. Later that night, my niece Helen called after being contacted by the airport staff. She sounded panicked. Aunt Margaret, where are you? What happened? When I told her everything, there was silence on the line, a heavy, furious silence. Then she said, Auntie, Daniel's been trying to sell your house. He said you were moving in with them in Spain. The agent even showed me the listing last week. I remember setting the phone down slowly, my fingers cold. The betrayal was complete. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't confusion. It was a plan. I sat there in that small airport office, wrapped in a blanket, the sound of planes echoing faintly in the distance. And for the first time in 75 years, I felt something sharper than heartbreak, something quiet, focused, and burning, resolve. If Daniel had left me behind to take everything I had, then he had underestimated the woman who'd survived a lifetime of storms. I wasn't finished yet. The morning after that long, sleepless night in the airport was strangely calm. The sun rose through the terminal windows like nothing had happened, painting the polished floors in gold. I remember watching it and thinking, how dare the world still look so beautiful when mine had fallen apart? Helen came to fetch me not long after sunrise. She ran toward me with open arms, her face pale from worry. Aunt Margaret, she whispered, holding me tightly, you should have called me sooner. I didn't have the strength to answer. The tears had dried, leaving behind something harder, something that no longer bent with sadness. On the drive home, I stared out the window in silence, my mind replaying Daniel's words over and over. Stay in the airport lounge, Grandma. We'll come back for you after check-in. Every syllable now felt like poison. Over the next few days, Helen helped me go through my mail and bank records. That was when the truth began to unfold like a slow, cruel play. Daniel had already begun the paperwork to transfer my house into his name. He had forged my signature on certain documents. The holiday to Spain wasn't a gift, it was a distraction. If Aisha and the airport staff hadn't filed an official report of abandonment, I might have had no proof at all. But fate, it seemed, had decided to give me one last hand to play. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I used to feed Daniel porridge as a boy, and stared at the documents spread before me. For a moment, I saw his little face again, covered in jam, laughing at some silly cartoon. How does a heart that once loved so purely become capable of such cruelty? I didn't know. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going to let him win. With Helen's help, I found a solicitor, a sharp, kind woman named Mrs. Lawson, who treated me not as a frail old lady, but as someone worth fighting for. We filed a fraud report, revoked the documents, and froze Daniel's access to my accounts. Every day felt like walking uphill through fog, but I kept moving. I owed that to myself. Weeks passed, then months. Daniel called once, leaving a voicemail full of excuses. "Mom, it was Clara's idea. I didn't know what she planned. Please just call me back." But I didn't. Revenge, I learned, doesn't always need shouting or anger. Sometimes it's quiet, like shutting a door softly and locking it forever. When everything was legally settled, I decided it was time to leave that old house behind. The walls held too many echoes, laughter that no longer meant anything, promises that had turned to dust. I sold the house myself and moved to a small seaside cottage in Brighton. The place was simple but lovely, white curtains, sea blue walls, and a view of the horizon that stretched endlessly. Aisha came to visit me one weekend. We walked along the beach, our shoes sinking into the sand. She laughed and said, "You look younger, Grandma, like the sea gave you a new heart." Maybe it had. I started knitting again, baking for the local charity, and volunteering at the Airport Travelers Fund, the same organization that had once helped me. I even donated enough to set up a small resting spot near the Heathrow Lounge, with a plaque that reads, "Margaret's Bench, for those waiting to be found." Every now and then, I still receive letters from Daniel. I don't open them anymore. The last one I read was full of apologies, but I've learned that some words mean nothing after the damage is done. Now, when I sit by my window with a cup of tea, I think of that day, of the hours I spent waiting in the airport, believing love would come back for me. And I smile not with bitterness, but with peace. Because in the end, I realized something important. They left me behind to take my life away. But what they really did was set me free. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't in making them pay. It's in living so well that they can never touch your happiness again.